We will now be moving on to session 2 of our program, which really will help us to unpack and understand the social security responses to realities of the informal economy. Informal economy, which I think is an area that needs further understanding, because in my perspective, I think it's something that is always viewed to be an element that is always in transition, where people engage in an informal economy in order to transition to a much more formal economy. But I think, having said that, it is a very crucial social security imperative. And in order to unpack this aspect, there will be a talk by Juliane and Nicola. Juliane holds a master's degree in psychology from the University of Constance in Germany, and a master's in human resources and organizations from the Department of Management in the London School of Economics. She started her career as a management consultant with Bain & Company before she was asked to build a niche research and consulting firm or company for AfriaCheck in South Africa. Through her career, she had led various research projects for leading international organizations such as the United Nations Development Programme, as well as the ILO. Among the organizations that she served or led research for, national departments with a focus on SMMEs, the informal sector, employment creation for young people, as well as the digital economy and other related digital skills. So her talk will focus mainly on the research and insights gained from projects that focused on the need for social insurance schemes in the informal sector and the possibilities of setting up business asset insurance. In addition to that, she's an experienced coach with clients from all over the world seeking guidance in their professional and personal lives. And then as far as Nicola goes, she's a social protection expert with more than a decade of experience. Currently, I'm a doctoral student associated to the International Studies Group at the University of the Free State, where her research focuses mainly on women and social protection in Zimbabwe. She's also a researcher and research and statistics officer for the National Social Security Authority in Zimbabwe, and among other organizations that she's affiliated with is the South African Social Security Expert Network, which is SUSPEN. She's also a member of the Stellenbosch Institute for Advanced Studies in South Africa, Project on Migration, Vulnerability and Access to Social Protection. She's also a member of the Young Scholars Initiative, as well as the member of the Zimbabwe Mortality Working Group. And at this point, I'm going to ask Juliane to come forth and address us. As Nicola concludes, as Juliane concludes her talk, we will move over to a talk by Nicola. And then after that, we will then move over to a session where we will invite questions, comments, and input for the responses by the respective speakers. And as far as the online participants are concerned, please keep your questions or post them on the chat box where we will read them in that questions, answers, and input session. So I will then call Juliane to come and address us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm very glad to be here. Okay. And yeah, I'll be presenting on the research we've been doing with members of the informal sector in South Africa. And as I was driving here, I thought back of the time we actually should I use the yeah, for the over the two research phases. I think we spoke to in one phase 4,500, and in the other phase, more than 3,000 entrepreneurs and business owners, people in the informal sector, through the field researchers that really did the bulk of the work for the research across South Africa. And I was driving here and I thought back about the days and all of the conversations we had, all of the questions we asked. And I remember I always asked myself that, would I actually be able to run that business? Would I actually be able to make a living with the commitment, the dedication, the work hours of the that we see as people working in the informal sector? And more interviews we had, the more I was humbled that it is really, really, I always thought I might not be able to do it, or it would really require a lot from me. And it's so interesting because a lot of people we spoke to, they've really run their business for a very long time and also very successful time. But when UNDP asked us at the time to help with the research, that was during COVID, when the lockdown had actually started, and they were incredibly interested to find out how COVID has affected the informal sector. And that's when we actually started the interviews. We went out, we spoke to entrepreneurs, we spoke to people working for informal sector businesses. And at the time, it was a severe shock, because what we found out, obviously, what also a lot of you might know, is that the COVID pandemic has really highlighted the vulnerabilities of people working in the informal sector. So when we spoke to people at the time, it was a time they could not make any income, and it kind of ate away the savings, the small savings that they had built over the years, and also for some, it ate away just the small assets that they had for their business, or even some of them had financed assets that they then could not pay off. So it was nearly a feeling in the informal sector that COVID-19 has put them back to square one. And there was already a sector who kind of works the hardest to get to the business they had. So that was the first research we did. That was in 2020, when we really spoke in all provinces across South Africa to businesses, entrepreneurs, or hustlers in the informal sector. And then after that, we really realized from that research that social insurance is a main need that people in the sector have, and it's also a possible solution to cover businesses, business owners, entrepreneurs against the shocks, not only the shocks like COVID-19, but other shocks that we will see later on. So out of the research, there was a realization that UNDP had that came out of the findings that one needs to look closer into social insurance. And I still remember at the time, because I was also reaching out to Isobel from SPI, and we were trying to connect the different work that was going on in the field. And people who've been working on social insurance in the informal sector for long, they always said, we don't know what's going on. Suddenly everyone is interested in small businesses and in the informal sector. And I think it was that realization, that big shock of COVID, what it meant for people who were basically what we call in South Africa the missing middle, kind of people who are excluded from the formal sector or marginalized from there, and people who also don't fall into any other grants that are paid out based on the pure need, but people who actually make a day-to-day living. And then we had a second research also commissioned by UNDP as part of their efforts focusing on social protection, where we looked at the specific social security needs that entrepreneurs in the informal sector identify for themselves. And that's where we kind of digged deeper to ask what are the risks, what are the requirements, what are the needs. And based on that, we developed an idea or a proposal for a business asset insurance and tried to work with different private sector organizations to pilot that. But I will explain that in a little bit more detail how we arrived there. But in terms of who I'll be speaking about, we spoke to people in the informal sector with the definition that the ILO also uses is entrepreneurs and people who run informal businesses and people who work in those informal businesses. So it excludes informal employment. I think that's important to mention. All right, then the first section, the status. And I think that you might be aware of the status of the informal sector, but just to recap, we know that in South Africa, a lot of people turn to the informal sector to high employment. We also actually did for Harambee one research that was focused on young people in the informal sector. And we found it over and over again that it was by necessity, not by choice, obviously, that they would go into the sector. And it's really a month-to-month hard-earned building of businesses with the average income of 4,000 per month, and also with high fluctuations. The informal sector, many businesses make most money around Christmas or festive seasons, where they can go up maybe to 6,000, and then other month just maybe 2,000. So also fluctuations, so very vulnerable working in the sector. So then the missing middle is what we've identified over and over again. There's a huge need for social insurance schemes for the individuals, but also for their businesses. And if you look at what the businesses do, 50% work in trade, 25% in community, social and personal services, anything from the beauty parlors, repair, manufacturing, any equipment, but also a lot like in catering and food. And also we spoke to a lot of business owners or entrepreneurs who work in the recycling chain. So the waste pickers and the recyclers also make up a huge proportion. And with social insurance, I think everyone who's worked in the sector for a very long time will know that the ability to pay is rather low. So what we found out through the research, and we were able to triangulate the information with some industry associations that work in the informal sector, is that members can, or people can maybe contribute 600 rent, or a maximum of 1,800 per year. So that equates to 50 to 150 rent a month, but not everyone can pay consistently considering the fluctuations. And that is a very low amount. And that's why we also identified that a lot of the social security needs will need subsidies. And I will walk you through the thinking that we had based on our research just in a bit. Now, we were interested with the research, what are the main risks, or what are the biggest concerns that entrepreneurs or business owners, workers have in the informal sector. And the three main concerns that came out is really not making any money with the business for a longer period of time, the loss of assets, which is mainly due to theft, but also due to weather, high rainfall, floods. There's still a challenge with the lack of shelter for a lot of traders, and the fear of falling ill, being incapacitated or hospitalized for a longer time. And the challenge is that most participants in the survey, they were sole breadwinners of the family, and they also were able to save just a tiny bit over many years. So if they don't make money for a month or two, that completely falls away. So that's where the big fear came from also, the big concern, which is a very realistic concern. If I actually can't keep up with this business on a day-to-day, it will really throw me back to square one. And this was on top of the research that we did for COVID-19, when we identified that part of the biggest needs for interventions that business owners or entrepreneurs see is actually a social insurance. And that's basically the specific risks that they would like to have addressed. Oh, sorry. Then if we zoom in a little bit and look at their needs and possible solutions, when we ask what of the support would be most helpful, we asked a wide range of questions, and the field researchers obviously explained it. What came out first is better healthcare, and really better healthcare also in a sense that if you need to go and get treated, there's really an interest to go back to work as soon as possible. So there was a huge concern that due to the healthcare also, participants in the survey felt that they might not be able to generate an income for a while. And also what was interesting for us is we spoke to different industry associations across different countries. And I remember when we spoke to the Informal Sector Association in Zambia, that was very interesting. They were actually very far with some of the industry insurance initiatives, and they kept on reminding me that these are business owners, these are entrepreneurs, see them through their business. And that's what also came out in the research over and over again, that a lot of their needs, a lot of their focus, a lot of their risk was always spoken about in relation to how they think about wanting to build their business and maintain their business. Then the social grant is still seen as something very important, because it provides a buffer, it provides some base income on which you can build. And also we know that especially after COVID, throughout COVID, a lot of people had to resort to grants just to get going again as kind of like a startup capital. And I think we've also, from the research, and I think SPI was also leading in that for many time, we've seen that social grants are still very helpful in buffering against absolute poverty. But then the third thing that came out, and I think that's what also interested UNDP at the time, was actually the social insurance. So there was a wide awareness in the informal sector that social insurance is one possible intervention that can buffer or can help buffer against many of the risks. And when we ask what type of insurance, what should the benefits be, you can see that the two blue ones that came out first, it's unemployment. So that was really the main concern, and asset insurance. And then other things like health insurance, life insurance, pensions, and insurance like in terms of maternity cover, giving birth, were also very, very important, but were mentioned after that. And I think that also reflects, again, really the focus or the need to say we also need some insurance cover that helps us to maintain and build our businesses. And then we looked at the possible types of insurance schemes. And some of them, we tried to map it at the time. Obviously, you have the personal insurances in green on the left-hand side. And these are a lot of insurance schemes that that mirror the protection that you would have in the formal sector through to your employer or an employer linked to government scheme in many other countries. And also what characterizes a lot of the personal insurances is that it's quite contribution heavy because it gets paid out over a longer time frame. So there's a huge need for the green side on the left, and at the same time, with the research we did and the models we ran, it is very challenging, and we have not seen any case study that was successful in implementing those insurances solely on contributions. And I think that's why we also see that the work in South Africa on the social insurance for personal insurance has always advocated, and there's been so much work and research going into that, for subsidies into that sector, because technically the informal sector also subsidizes the economy. And that's why the subsidies there are very, very important. And as we were looking at it at the time, we then worked together with other organizations and departments to use the research insights, also through NSFAS, not NSFAS, sorry, NETLEC, to work together and see how can the research insights help the work that is already happening for personal insurance and for government's effort to include the informal sector in those insurance schemes. But as we were doing the research, what became apparent to us is that there's still a need aside the personal insurance, which speaks specifically to the business insurance. For example, for equipment, machinery, and material. And that can go from small equipment that you would need to produce food or to cook or to, just in a hair salon, actually, we found out that on average they have 4,000 rand of worth of assets, but it can also be the stall, the cover, the shield, the container. And then some do have vehicles, and also a business insurance for stock, because how a lot of entrepreneurs in the informal sector still maintain their business is that the stock you sell helps you to buy the new stock. So if your stock gets stolen or lost, it really puts your business under severe strain and can be the end of your business. There is now some relief, obviously, through some app and bulk orders and building a credit score through ordering, but still that there is a need. And then also need, as I said, for stall. And what came up over and over again is being incapacitated for a short amount of time if there's an option to cover that need as well, so that business owners know, even if I can't work for a month or two, I can continue my business. And what came out of the research that we did a lot is that all of these needs are incredibly important to people working in the informal sector in their identity as entrepreneurs and as business owners. And at the time, when we were trying to link the research to the efforts that are already ongoing in South Africa and have been ongoing for many, many years, I think Isobel said once 13 years she was already working on it, we tried to find a way to say, can we somehow allocate the different needs to say, while there is a need for subsidies and a need to work together also with government on the personal insurance, can we somehow offer a business insurance that the entrepreneurs, business owners can take out on the side so that they would have a cover on the green and the blue side that is coming together? And for that, we try to explore where to start. That also came out of our mapping when we tried to see where do we actually stand in terms of the affordability and the priority of different type of benefits for people in the informal sector. And what you can see is that there's a huge need for a lot of benefits that I've presented. But when you look at the affordability, the asset insurance and a lump sum protection against a loss of income looks as very affordable, as more affordable, because you can actually do some cover, offer some cover that you can pay out as a lump sum. Because if you have to pay out over multiple weeks a month, obviously it becomes very tricky to pay that by contributions only and needs subsidies. But if you look at an asset insurance or loss of income as a lump sum, it becomes more affordable. So that's where an opportunity arises for a solely contributory insurance scheme. And we tried to identify that. And while the research was used to contribute to the efforts in the other insurance benefits types, we try to carve that out and see what can UNDP specifically do about that type of insurance. And that was the next step we then took, where we tried to really map out how could a scheme look like for a business asset insurance. And we identified that it would have to be maximum 1,200 per year that has to be paid whenever money comes in. And it must be a very seamless premium collection. That is very, very important, because that puts a block on a lot of insurance schemes, especially in South Africa, because the debit orders through airtime or through the phone are still a challenge with the legislation. We then identified the broad benefit covers, and we also looked at what would be the amount that is needed by the businesses and entrepreneurs. And that we all verified and developed together with representatives of the industry associations. And then we also looked how could actually such an insurance be able to build trust and be distributed in the informal sector, because that is also very, very key. So the distribution scheme, the premium collection, seamless premium collection, and the affordability came out over and over again as the key success criteria, obviously combined with a suitable cover, a suitable amount, and a marketing that speaks to the entrepreneurs. And from there on, we tried to make some progress. So with the primary and secondary research we did that I've presented, we developed that concept for the business asset insurance, and then we aligned with the stakeholders working in the sector or representing people working in the informal sector to verify the information we had, to triangulate our assumptions, and to see what would be the specific needs. And then we started looking for insurance in companies that would be interested, that we can actually onboard. And there was a huge interest by Sanlam that could work together with IO. IO is the mobile insurance wing of MTN. So we had a lot of sessions, and we helped them to use the insights out of the research to refine their insurance, business asset insurance that they were building and already piloting for the informal sector, which goes through my phone and is very, very user-friendly. So we help them with their product development sessions based on the research. But there's still a huge interest that UNDP has to continue the work. There's an interest to do stakeholder engagement workshops to further flesh out the product, but particularly think through how the product could be distributed and how it can reach more entrepreneurs and business owners. And also then launch it in a manner that it speaks to UNDP's interest, saying how can we actually launch the pilot that speaks to a specific need also for women, youth, and people living with disabilities. And then, of course, UNDP is always open to other ideas, and we are always grateful if we can support that with any research or consulting projects. All right. We're taking questions now or after? We're taking questions.
Thank you very much, Juliane, for sharing your perspectives and insights. At this point, we will now take a talk from Nicola. Over to you, Nicola.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Nicola. You may proceed, and
Oh,
we've got your
okay.
presentation loaded on this. We've got your slides
Okay.
loaded as well.
Okay, thank you very much. My presentation is basically focused on social security responses to realities of the informal sector and the informal economy based on experiences elsewhere, including of Zimbabwe and other countries that I've managed to engage with along the way. So you'll find that the informal sector, this consists of workers who are in the informal economy, which make up like 61% of the global labor force, more than 2 billion workers, nearly 83% of employment in Africa, and 85% in sub-Saharan Africa is informal. In South Africa, the ILO estimates imply that informal employment represents over 40% of total employment, while out of the informal sector is estimated to be almost 30% that contribute to the output. You find that in the past, policy narratives in Africa tended to either neglect informal economies or even view them as potentially threatening to formal economies, therefore leading elimination and control rather than support and investment for inclusive structural economic transformation. But over time, an alternative policy narrative began to take root as it dawned on policymakers that the informal economy was here to stay and played a significant role in contributing to African countries' economies. While this narrative still viewed the informal economy as outside formal arrangements and often found on the edge of high vulnerability to poverty, low earnings, irregular income, bad working conditions, and dominated by women, it brought significant attention to welfarist policies to ensure safety nets, minimum floors, and access to basic social protection. So why does the informal economy matter? It speaks to issues of social justice. Everyone should benefit from the country's resources, including social protection initiatives. It's a human right. Everyone should have the right to social protection. As advanced, I'm getting a message that is echoed. I don't know if that is from my end or from that end. My apologies for that. Hello? Hello? Are you still hearing the echoes?
No, that actually sounds better now. Thanks.
Yeah, I think you can
Okay.
continue, Nicola. We'll fix it as you proceed.
Oh, okay. So it also speaks to issues of decent work because the people in the informal economy operate outside the formal system. Therefore, they are exposed to dangerous and precarious working conditions because they are not catered for in terms of the formal aspects that speak to issues of occupational health and safety. But we find that they contribute to a country's development through various taxes, whether indirectly or directly, and they deserve to be recognized and benefit from social security initiatives. What is impeding the extension of coverage to the informal sector? One of the major issues that impedes the coverage to the informal sector is the issue of legal barriers. Some countries' legislation explicitly excludes certain groups of workers from social insurance coverage based on employment status, occupation, or sector. Commonly excluded workers encompass domestic workers, migrant workers, own account workers, and agricultural, casual, and temporary workers, where the self-employed and typically hard to cover groups are shielded with protection, where the self-employed and typically hard to cover groups are shielded with protection thanks to national legislation. It is mostly on a voluntary basis. And these schemes you find that are largely ineffective in achieving broad coverage due to adverse selection. You find that people sometimes feel embarrassed to go and claim these benefits, although that because it's on a voluntary basis. They feel embarrassed. It's something that speaks to their dignity when they are asked. So you find that there's adverse selection when it comes to voluntary coverage. Another issue that impairs the extension of coverage is a weak or ineffective enforcement of applicable labor and social security regulations. The labor laws sometimes are there, but the enforcement is lacking. So it doesn't make any impact if we have the laws on paper, but it's not being implemented on the ground. So this really also affects extension of coverage. Then we have limited institutional capacities. You find that there are social security institutions that provide social security, but because they do not have the capacity to then extend it to the informal sector, they do not have, making it difficult to carry out well-intended policies. Sometimes it will be crafted so well, but that capacity to then make this intention, put it into practice, becomes a problem. Hence, in creating social security policies and undertaking social security initiatives in the informal economy, they should be brought in to also have their buy-in, to include them as much as possible. Lack of incentives is also another major issue for whereby you find that many countries are advocating for formalization, but because the people in the informal sector have seen how these social security institutions are treating the people that are part of the formal situation, and then they don't feel inclined to then want to come and contribute because they see like money has been wasted. They hear of all the corruption activities. This may discourage workers and employers from operating in the formal economy and joining social security. Limited information and awareness on social protection rights and available schemes is also an issue. These schemes might exist in countries, but you find that the informal economy themselves are not aware of what packages are there. They are not aware of their rights. And this then also impedes the extension of coverage. Then you also have lack of organization and representation. The informal economy is characterized by the absence of workers' representation and organization, making it difficult for workers to voice and defend their rights, especially those at the bottom of the informal sector pyramid. For example, subsistence farmers, domestic workers, and etc. Then you find there's also burdensome and lengthy administrative procedures and processes in terms of registration, contribution payment, delivery, and claiming mechanisms. The informal sector needs systems that are designed to their needs. There are people on the go. Spending time waiting to register or to receive a benefit means money for them. Time is money. So they need systems that are simple and effective, that meet their income patterns. Affordability is also another issue. You find that many workers in the informal economy have little income or volatile income. When today they have money, they'll probably go 3, 4, 5 months without adequate money. They live in poverty or are at risk of poverty, which limits their capacity to contribute regularly, unlike those in the formal sector. Then we have weak governance structures, both at policy design and operational levels, which negatively affects effectiveness, efficiency, and equity of service delivery. There's knowledge gaps about workers in informal employment. You find the social security institutions themselves do not have adequate knowledge of the informal economy in terms of size, the characteristic of the employer, so that they can design schemes for them. So this makes it even more challenging. So what can be done for them? You need the approaches to address the informal economy include contributory initiatives, for example, social insurance such as health, pensions, and unemployment, non-contributory initiatives such as social assistance, which is conditional and unconditional cash transfers, social pensions, stipends, and in-kind transfers. A combination of these initiatives can be used to then reach the informal sector. You can formalize the informal sector, where there should be commitments to close coverage and adequacy gaps in social protection to facilitate the transition from the informal to formal economy and create decent work. This has been done in Malaysia, Brazil, Argentina, You can promote an inclusive and effective legal and institutional framework that provides adequate protection for all workers, that speaks to their needs, because you find a majority of countries have laws that do not cater for those in the informal economy. They are not spoken to, so they operate on the margins. So you find countries that have done something to address this through a revaluation of the law and extension of the law, a scope of law to include, for example, the domestic workers. You find Bolivia, China, and the Philippines have done such initiatives. Expand or adapt existing schemes to include them. This strategy, although usually targeted at but not limited to categories of workers who are closer to the formal economy that have a similar setup, has been done. The initiatives can include reducing the legal barriers to which I've spoken to, extending the legal coverage in terms of the laws to specific occupations such as domestic workers. This has been done in the Philippines and Uruguay. Modify eligibility conditions on the minimum period of employment, such has been done in the Netherlands and Vietnam. Extending mandatory social insurance to the self-employed. This has been done in Indonesia, Japan, Korea, and the Philippines. Or follow a gradual extension strategy where you, because the informal sector is made up of so many sectors and economies in there, you start one sector at a time and gradually build up one group at a time, step by step. Establish, or another method is establish separate or new schemes that include specific contributory schemes that target specific groups. This has been done in Algeria and Belgium. Sector and occupation specific schemes have been done in China and India, where they created schemes specifically for construction workers who are not part of the formal sector, but the scheme that was created addressed the unique needs and barriers. Enhance organization and representation of the informal economy. For example, Cambodia has the Independent Democracy of Informal Economy Association, a union which represents the informal workers in terms of the street vendors, taxi drivers, tuk-tuk drivers. This association advocates for workers' rights to social protection and assists workers in accessing the National Social Security Fund's ID for free health. So by having them organized and brought like specifically under one umbrella, it becomes easier for them to be represented. Introduce comprehensive and integrated extension strategies in line with national priorities. Tailor schemes or programs and policies measures to the needs of the informal workers. Introduce financial incentives. Governments can provide subsidies for social insurance contributions or financing the benefits of low income or other vulnerable groups, such as been done in Brazil, Thailand, and Uruguay. But a major issue is that one has to bear in mind that there is no one size fits all. What might work in Zimbabwe, Uruguay, or China might not work in South Africa. Approaches need to be developed according to the country context and according to the needs of the specific sector of the informal economy, because their needs vary. So we can't all have one size fits all. They need to be tailor-made. Simplify administrative procedures and step up access to administrative services. That is making the whatever social security scheme that has been developed for them to make it easier for them to register and access their benefits. Foster complementary interventions beyond social protection. Speak to issues of labor legislation and regularization, formalization of enterprises, tax policies, and promoting organization and representation. Intensify awareness, raising and sharing information with those in the informal sector. Promote trust in the social protection system so that they see that these systems work. They see that they will benefit from being part of these social security initiatives. Then combine the extension of contributory coverage with the establishment of national social protection floors. If there's a national social protection floor as the base cover and other contributory initiatives, building on that national social protection, you find that more people will be reached and at least the basics of coverage is achieved. In conclusion, what I want to say is that the informal economy has moved in and it is here to stay. It's no longer an issue of thinking that the informal economy will move away and then be replaced by the formal economy, because there are just no jobs, there's unemployment regionally, globally, internationally. So it's here to stay. It is going to continue to grow. So we need to offer initiatives that speak to them. Let's give it a seat at the table. Let's recognize and support its growth and development through the development and implementation of social security policies that speak to its needs. Let's make social security a reality for the informal economy through policies that are responsive, inclusive, and sustainable. Hashtag just transition, hashtag leave no one behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nicola, for your address. At this point, I would invite questions, comments, and inputs for both Juliane and Nicola. Moses, just be cognizant of any questions that may arise and post it on the chat. I will start with participants who are with us here physically for any questions, comments, and inputs. It seems that there are none. Moses, anything on the chat box? Okay, I take it that we will then conclude this session. I would like to take this opportunity to thank you, Juliane, as well as Nicola, for your valuable contributions. For the participants who are with us here physically, we will take a short break, and then after that we will continue to do the reflections for the 2 days. Thank you.
So I've got a colleague who's actually on the Informal Insurance Society at the time, huge specialization section and her about insurance. And that's very well, is this something one needs to consider as a framework for the unknown? And we know that people die and what we see. And you know, it's challenging. Like that's possibly why people are nervous about insurance. But so I said I'm going to work NASA. So love like I said, because you really also do have short-term insurance interest rate. They would probably be high interest in this. Obviously, if it's a bit tricky, I assume it's probably not get something else.
This is yours.
So I know reasonably well that you actually have a mutual share. So wrong version. To chat to them because our mutual did previously have it that I want to change the way we kind of focus on the product. And it was very interesting because they also wanted to show you their switch off. Because actually your scoreboard goes down. Mind why it goes down, because it goes down. You know, so for people who have sense being heard. So exactly that might be a problem. That might be very interesting to work also in life insurance. Which is more on the life insurance side where I can understand why people are thinking this. Yeah, I'm based in this. So I'm using some donated from really my personal funds. I'm people. So Imran was pleased with what Frye. He's so throughout Africa, so he knows the model, and how they work reasonably well. That was his big focus area, was actually microinsurance and mobile insurance. We have done some work with agricultural microinsurance previously. Perhaps not for some time, but I would say that I know someone who needed insurance who might be. They are very difficult to apply. Also, what works in India doesn't necessarily happen here, but I definitely know that because one of my former colleagues did a study in this rural facility where we did women's pay exercises for people on agricultural insurance. And they did get some interesting results out of it. It was lovely, and then also superb. Thank
Yeah. It's Friday. Sorry that I haven't been here, I've just been in NEDLAC virtually. So I have been told that the program has ended in additional time. And I would suggest that we actually bring the day to end earlier so that we are free to lunch and leave. But I feel a bit underwater. So Tony, you can be free to decide now about research. And then maybe we can just have a generalized discussion about what it takes this space for each year as also collective research. Because the one that is happy to engage in such discussions. And then we go home. And I don't tell you what people I do. So it is 9 minutes to 12 now. And I propose that we do 9 minutes of break and then go outside. I think you don't know if you've got a nice
There's 7 people on the Zoom.
7 people on there.
Yes, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
including me and Moses as well.
Okay, let's
So it's
all
fine.
5 important people. I'm going to suggest that we. Where's the camera?
It's here.
Okay, because I want us to have some more of a general, smaller discussion. So if we bring some tables through there, will we cut off vision?
I can turn the
I have
camera.
no spatial. Oh, if you can turn.
Yes, yeah.
And we can bring some tables here so we can have a more discussion. Sorry, can you help me move some tables? I think just move these two just here. shared. It's a general discussion that we can have collectively. Okay, thanks everybody. Lots of energy here. Last session, you get an additional half day on Friday. And as you've announced to your officer, you're coming back, which means that you're a very honest person. Great. So unfortunately, there has been, thanks. This is the busiest time of year, and I was just speaking to the director of FAS yesterday about how maybe we should try and change our program around and have it in halfway through the year. And she said, but 12 months are 12 months. There is always just 12 months. You know, wherever you position yourself, you're going to come across the same, the last minute push towards trying to finish and consolidate everything. But I don't want to take up much of your time, but I do want to benefit from your brains. And in exchange, you get a nice lunch with a nice view and maybe some Wi-Fi. So this is all a bit of sort of in motion change. Can I just ask, so you'll be filming that for the people who are virtually here? Great, because I hope that they stay virtually. And what we had on the program was half an hour just of closing remarks and commitments. And I have benefited from Twane, who was here present today, who's collected some thoughts into a slide. I'm going to present them, and then really I am going to walk around with this and poke people until you have some ideas. Because what we're looking for at SPY, we're coming to the end of a 4-year strategic plan. We're wanting to embrace the kinds of research which can lead to multi-year projects and plans. Our idea, and this is just to share our vision, is we believe that there is a need in South Africa for a social security institute that is able not only to advance social assistance, but also the kinds of products for social insurance to ensure that the informal economy, women, precarious workers are able to contribute in ways that they have control over their lives rather than them being sucked out into the financial world as we saw yesterday. So we're hoping that in the next half hour, we can just start identifying some of those. Also, there are people who are representing other partners, and just a heads up saying we'd like to explore this with you would be a way for us to take the conversation forward either in December or in the new year. So Twane, can we have that slide, please? Have you sent it to Moses? Cool. Okay, do I go there now? Can we, sorry. Hi, could we have you guys inside, please? I'm going to turn this off and be picked up here. Okay, so without exposing them to any embarrassing situations, can you unmute them collectively? Okay, so people who are online, you've been incredibly patient throughout today. I know that there wasn't as much discussion, it's been reported, as there was yesterday, but can you show a wave and a hand if you are going to be active in this discussion so that I don't ignore you? Hello? Reinhard has lifted his hand. Thank you, Reinhard. Anybody else? Okay. And inside, if you could just go through the room and just identify your name so that people online know who's here, starting with you, Kwesi.
Hi, my name is Kwesi.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm as you can see, the IEJ.
Sorry. Oh.
Hi everyone. Hi everyone. Hi everyone. From ABS.
Everyone, it's Norma from SPI.
Good morning, everyone. Anthony Makwiramiti from DSD.
AKA SBI.
Greetings once again, Tuane from the SPI.
Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, Ndinampilo from SPI.
Hello everyone, Moses Gus from SPI. Thank you.
Great. Okay. So, okay. Right, Tanya, sorry, I thought that you were going to collect closing remarks, but you've kind of said we should answer questions as to what this means. Okay, I'll read this. So there are cross-cutting issues that need further research and engagement, such as defining new modalities of just transitions to move away from coloniality and neoliberal influences. The theme of the symposium is relatively new to many, and we need more people to get on board in advocating for the social security in this area of just transitions. What does this mean for individuals and community? What is the role of all stakeholders, government, civil society, labor, and business? Who leads on what, and how do we build a social compact to foster a new societal deal for just transitions? Thanks. Tani, can you just take the microphone and just mention sort of 2 new areas of research? You were taking notes yesterday that came through yesterday for you. I think particularly I was interested in what the ILO had to say.
I think for me...
Indeed, can you scribe, please?
I think for me, one of the new areas of research that I think came across from the discussions of yesterday was more around financing of UBI, especially taking into account some of the areas that were suggested, like using the foreign exchange currency reserves. I think that's one of the areas.
Knight Rider?
Yeah, I think that's one of the areas that came out for me as far as the new areas of research are concerned. I think also when it relates to just transitions and social security, I think an area that can be further explored is the influence of institutions on social security and just transitions. And when I mean institutions, I mean the formal and informal institutions. Mean looking at the formal institutions being policies, for instance, the type of laws that the country has, and informal institutions taking into account the logics of society, for instance. So I think that's the type of research that can be done as far as just transitions and social security is concerned, the influence of institutions on those. So yeah, thinking out of the cigarette light pack and a lot of notes that was taken yesterday, those are 2 suggested areas.
Okay, so the one being the research that SPI did last year with Duma on the new financing. So that has been done, that has been completed, that has been concluded. And the other is looking at just transitions, the institutions that make the just transitions happen. Is that?
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. Yes,
okay.
That's what I meant.
Great.
And I think as far as the research that Duma did yesterday, we can actually expand on that.
How?
Looking at financing UBI through the foreign currency
Okay, but I'm saying that that's already been published as Frye research. So for a future research agenda coming out of yesterday, what was the financing question that you saw emerging?
Yeah, as I was saying, utilization of foreign currency exchange reserves.
Okay. I'm going to ask Norma, and then I'm going to open it up to non-SPI, beyond SPI, should I say. Could you please give Norma a microphone? Thank you.
Thanks, Indy. So from the 2 days, there are research topics that came up as from suggested partners like the ILO in hosting a convention on possible coverage gap in the social security space, as well as today from Juliane at UNDP. She has done work in the informal sector, looking at social insurance for the sector in South Africa. And she's indicated that UNDP would continue the work and would appreciate partnership in that. Whether these are SPI's areas of research interest, I don't know. And for me personally, I think, I don't know what SPI would want to continue to assist the partners ILO in UNDP or come up with their own research topic. My brain is so dead from the 2 days, I'm sorry.
Okay, then I think that we definitely need to open it up. Dio, you're able to take notes and move the microphone, or should we
I'll do it.
Okay, great.
It wasn't necessarily just on the informal economy. It was my understanding of what Jasmina presented was that they were looking for someone to help look, I wouldn't call it the cost benefit analysis for unemployment benefits, but to look at what return do societies get from providing. Well, it was phrased as return on investment, but I think it's better contextualized as not just a financial return. So it's not my idea. It was one that Jasmina put out, and I have floated it by a colleague who's interested in a PhD topic on that. And then another research opportunity, which I wasn't sure I understood properly, was how ill health affects participation in the labor market.
So productivity impact.
I think it was on productivity, but also about inclusion. That was, again, I'm not sure if I interpreted that correctly. From an actuarial point of view, we have reached out to Duma to chat to him about some of the comments made about using the GPF and UIF surplus. So we're going to be having some chats because I think it opens the door to a more interesting conversation, which is on the funded versus unfunded approach to social security, because at NEDLAC, one of businesses' biggest objections to National Social Security Fund is they want it funded. Whereas Duma's view of the world is that unfunded.
A business says it should be funded and we can't afford to fund it, therefore it will not exist.
They're muddling a couple of actuarial concepts there, which I think is convenient for their purposes, but I think so having a conversation with Duma could be an interesting conversation starter in that area. So we've reached out to him. Obviously, Juliane's research is focused on insurance and microinsurance, and we've reached out to her in terms of how we can introduce her to various people within the insurance and actuarial communities who are very interested in financial inclusion in the informal sector as well.
And the actuarial your people will be having some roundtables next year on social security.
Absolutely.
And you would love to have people from here there.
Absolutely, and we're sharing stuff with Anthony about the work that we've been doing, and it's great to get different perspectives. Obviously, my particular research area isn't climate change, but I have 2 colleagues who are desperately interested in the subject, and I've started to share email addresses and phone numbers with various people here who I think would be good research partners for them. So thank you for a really interesting 2 days. Those would, in response to your research questions. Those were quite nice.
Can I say something while I've got the mic?
Yeah, I think this mic has now just become a moving mic. So Kwesi, at the end you can have the mic.
Yeah, I mean, my first point is the extent to which mainstream neoclassical and fairly neoliberal versions of neoclassical economics have become imperialist within the academia, not only within economics, but in actuarial science and other things. And so my caution would be that when people make assumptions and use economics, I mean, we've seen the problems of this within the Supreme Court. We've seen huge problems with this in the work of people like Nordhaus, who got the Nobel Prize, on his predictions and impacts of global warming and the damage that's causing now in the way in which mainstream economists have thought about it and have said you can value it. And so we really need to be careful in everything we do, particularly within academia, that the people who get involved in that are critical of mainstream economics and bringing economic concepts into that work, mainstream ways of economic thinking. And then the second point on that would be, I mean, I don't think it's an educational issue. I think, I mean, I've spent the last 30 years now watching people's eyes glaze over when I talk about macro and finance, whether you're mainstream or not mainstream. And a lot of the work we're talking about, when you're linking things to fiscal policy or budgets and those kind of things, there needs to be at least a semblance of understanding of macroeconomic concepts. And here particularly, I think, to be able to critique neoclassical economics and the level of how unrealistic it is and the kind of things that go into their model. And I can't remember if Asghar said it during his talk or during tea time, but I mean, like the work on the multiplier is being done with dynamic stochastic general equilibrium models, which Robert Solow, who developed the neoclassical growth theory, said doesn't smell the past test. It's just so unrealistic. The kind of assumptions that go into that are so unrealistic that it's actually not a viable model. Joseph Stiglitz has written about this, and other mainstream economists have about it as well. But most people within NEDLAC and other places aren't able to actually respond to that, to Treasury and say, this is bullshit.
So you're suggesting maybe a macroeconomic framework boot camp? I'm looking at FES.
I don't think that's going to work. I don't know. I don't know, maybe cheat sheets or something. But I mean, it's something I've been frustrated with for decades, not years, and I don't really have an answer.
So you left the university.
Yeah.
Well.
So okay, let me stop there before I get everybody feeling pessimistic. I don't know if Jess wants to.
But I think that idea of cheat sheets is crucial. I mean, we've just sat through NEDLAC this morning where community constituency said that we don't have enough money to do what we need to, because that's what Treasury said. So if they meant to be a social partner critiquing it, thank you.
I think the one thing that I think would be worth going into more, and I know we're not all on the same page, and it's important to have a discussion like this to get us all on the same page. And it's important to look at the various discussions of an analysis of what's actually happening. But I think we also need maybe more open focus on strategy and clear discussion and more time for discussion of strategy collectively. I don't know how to do that without all being on the same page about what needs to be done, but I think we also need to think more openly and collectively about how it needs to be done and what coalitions need to be built, etc.
Is that strategy for getting a UBI, or is that strategy around social security policy in general, or about progressive understanding of macro framework?
I think it's kind of all three. I think
is it about having another conference, or is it about working differently?
I think a lot of conferences, not just this one, tend to focus. We get caught up on the debate about what's happening and end up not having any time to discuss how to change it. And I think we need that as well.
Pearl, can you be a youth, a commissioner, and a laboratory person?
I think for me, there needs to be a bridge built between academia and practice. And I think a grounding of all of this work, right? So what I really like about A Decent Path is that it offers both the very kind of ideological and academic perspective around a UBI, but it locates it in the experiences of people who are meant to benefit from it. And so I think a lot of these conversations are great if you have a master's degree, but if you don't, it's really hard to see how people who are meant to do the work of lobbying and, you know, collective action and solidarity, communities, activists, civil society organizations, I think it's difficult to locate the practice with the academia. So for me, I think it would be about maybe a bit more bridging work rather than kind of pure research.
Yeah, which goes back a bit to the cheat sheet idea, just not necessarily cheat sheet, but how do you move the knowledge out of the task?
Yeah, and how do you exchange knowledge, right? Because I think even the idea of a UBI and a general kind of social protection floor, what that looks like at a university or a planning commission looks very different to a youth capital or a youth lab or the communities that these organizations serve. And so I think, yeah, just about what are the bridges that need to be built and what are the learnings that we can get from people who sit outside the kind of academic space to add into the work that we're doing. So rather than, you know, a UN agency doing research about the informal sector, actually talk to informal traders and bring them into the conversation, I think could take you a long way.
I think also you've just emphasized that point of making it really real and having a few people and saying, would you like to record, there's household diaries. What do you spend every month? And how much of it is money, how much of it is debt? For me, one of the major things is the question of mental health. The devastating trauma of poverty, grinding poverty without a solution, which goes back to the social impact to an extent of social expenditure. But not just, I think the challenge is how you locate the research process, not as an extractive one with communities. And so at the end of the day, you have to endorse a UBI for 1,500 Rand or you're not able to go past go. It's actually to be open to listen to solutions.
It's on the use of the word ideological and talking about community and live as ideological and others as academic. And just to point out that everything academic is deeply ideological. And ideology is everywhere and everybody's ideological, whether they know it or not. Whether you think like Hitler or whether you think like Marx. Right? And to understand that. And that then creates the room for critical thought and critical engagement like here. And what the treaty does is they'll say, we are doing evidence-based work as a way of showing other people off as populist or ideological.
Yeah.
And we really have to be careful in our language of that. And we have to accuse them of being free market ideologues as well. So there was
a woman from Treasury, Carmela Camilla Gamerdi when we started SPY. And she sat in one of our reference groups and she said, I'm from Treasury, I am value neutral, I have no ideology. And Charles Matthews, this old giant, he leapt across the room and said, no, you are the bastion of neoliberal kind of evil. So she was a bit shaken at that. But yes, absolutely, there is no, I mean, basically show your bias, because we all come with bias. So put that on the table.
Thank you so much. Just to build from the previous two speakers, Pearl and Mo. Firstly, there's no Chinese wall between knowledge in the university and knowledge in communities. There's no Chinese wall between the two. There's no space without people that doesn't have knowledge. Whenever people gather, there's knowledge taking place there, because every human activity that you do emerges from a particular paradigm of thinking. You know, how a family meets and gets to construct its way of producing food to feed the family, to raise the family. There is a powerful set of knowledge being exchanged in that area. In fact, knowledge does not flow from a university to communities. It's actually the other way around. People in university actually move out of their offices to go extract knowledge in communities, and then they bring it into the university and institutionalize it and publish it, you know. Otherwise, the actual place where knowledge is, it's in communities. In fact, the knowledge in the university is very little compared to what is out there, you know. I mean, in our own country alone, we have a population of 60 million people, right, who live in over 1 million communities. And you are telling me the knowledges of those communities are below the only 26 universities we have. Come on. So knowledge actually it's in communities. It's just a superiority complex that academics have of thinking that they are the reservoir of knowledge, and therefore let's see ourselves as rescuers of communities with the little that we know. There are people who've never been to the university who know far better than people who are in universities. In fact, yeah, let me just complete my train of thought, sorry. So to therefore derive what is taking place in communities, how communities are already pursuing very productive struggles of livelihood. We need actually to despecialize where we talk, despecialize where we think what is knowledge. Because this conversation could have taken place in any township. We just choose not to go there, you know. We just choose to stick in the ivory tower, you know, and think that we're engaged in knowledge. What I'm trying to say is communities every day, colleagues, they are involved in productive struggles already of livelihood. It's just that the people now who write these documents, they come with a briefcase that is already carrying theories, that is already carrying approaches, that is already carrying languages, that is also carrying priorities, right? And they try to extract what they think is relevant according to the briefcase that they are carrying, leaving the rest of the knowledges behind, or even disregard the one that is irrelevant to what they already know. So every stream of life, every community is an expression of a paradigm, of a particular paradigm, which what Mo called an ideology. Every civilization advances a particular ideology, and we've got to decide this ideology carried by this one. Is it a paradigm of imperialism, or is it a paradigm of liberation? What are the frustrations of people, and what do they think will take them forward?
if we say these people are poor and they need a social security, right? And these ones are privileged, they don't need social security. Then the question is, what is it that these privileged ones have that these ones who are underprivileged don't have? What makes these ones privileged forever? What makes their children continue reproducing privilege? What is this asset that they have in control that makes them untouchable on earth, right? That insulate them from floods, that insulates them from crime, that insulates them from university protests, right? What is it that they have that makes these ones who are underprivileged exposed to everything terrible in society? What is this? And this that they have is the land. The land that gives birth to all types of other privileges that the white race enjoys in South Africa and across the whole planet. And that asset reproduces all streams of privileges that they have, right? And then these ones at the bottom, we then craft all kinds of languages and excuses of why we were unable to rescue them. So the first thing to visit, what types of knowledges and paradigms are we using? Because if people are trapped in a poverty in a township, and we've come up with 20 documents on how to rescue them for the past 50 years, and they are still there, it therefore means there's something wrong with the knowledge we're using to construct this development we think is going to help them. And we've come up with so many terms: human development, sustainable development, youth development, inclusive development, women's development, community development. None of them is working. So it means the paradigm of knowledges we've been using to attach budgets to development is a wrong paradigm. It's identifying the wrong problem. And so long we want to continue being epistemically dishonest and not call things by their names, we're going to keep coming back to the same beginning for the next 100 years until we listen to the people themselves about what they want to do and what they want and who is the problem. Thanks.
Thanks. So sorry, just to wrap up. So in terms of SPI's knowledge plan for next year, am I hearing you say that we should start off by actually just locating ourselves in conversations, listening to communities, and that's where we generate our research agenda from? Okay, thanks, really, that's very insightful, thanks. Anthony, the community of government.
Okay.
We have our second bite of the cherry next week internally, but she whose name is Norma is also entitled to have a part of this conversation. Did you not want the mic, Norma?
No, it's fine. I can go first then. All right. Thanks. I think from the previous speakers and the last comments, it seems that to me that these are not straightforward issues. And I recall yesterday giving some input to saying, when we are dealing with a multiple of societal issues, we need to look at it from a multidimensional perspective to say, for example, we know we are confronted with poverty, inequality, unemployment, various social ills. There's elements of issues around income poverty. I think the previous speaker referred to the issue of land, which then talks to aspects of asset poverty for the majority of people in the country. So at the end of it, what I picked up from this symposium is that we need to have such a broader understanding of the issues and the diagnosis of the challenges that we have, and also then to say, with these challenges, how do we, one, finance them, how do we address them, and who is the targeted audience. So I was really moved by the participation to have the actuaries among us, researchers among us, academics among us, and policymakers. So part of my reflections, colleagues, is the issue, and it's a challenge to say to SPY and all of us to say, how do we broaden this conversation? How do we get more players into the room? For example, our colleagues yesterday, the afternoon presentations, they spoke about some modeling work from the economy side, from the social side. The former ILO colleague, is it Isobel or Isobel? Yeah. And also Jasmina spoke about issues of investment in social security. Now, when we talk about the issue of emerging disasters and climate change, unforeseen events, as SPY and other colleagues in the room, there is an emphasis that we need to put in saying, how do we have more advocacy in terms of underlining the importance of social security interventions? The previous speaker mentioned about that there are those who are more vulnerable and others are not. But when we look at social security, some of us in the room, we are in jobs, for example. But if there is no social security for you, like for example, you get injured, then you are no longer able to work. Then it means your ability to earn is now affected, and we have actuaries in the room, they can talk to the numbers there or the technical aspects. But we are all vulnerable as individuals, and social security is one of those areas that is critical for us to dig deeper into the conversation. And the colleagues on the other side, when we are in NEDLAC, they normally focus on the financial interest, but the well-being of the individuals, sometimes it's relegated, and say, if a particular intervention is proposed or is implemented, what is in for me? So sometimes progressive proposals can be put out or thrown out of the window because they might affect you in a particular way. So what am I saying? I don't know, is it facilitator or program director? What I'm saying is that arising from this conversation, the issues of advocacy, more advocacy in terms of creation of fiscal space, the importance of social security in the emerging environment where there are disasters, more institutional preparedness that was mentioned in the slide. How do we get our institutions more prepared? And that talks to the point, maybe I was too gentle to make the point, to say, how do we get all stakeholders in the room, like from the government sector, how do we get social development? How do we get environmental affairs in the room, small business development department, trade and industry, the national treasury to be part of this conversation? Because it can be that we bring stakeholders at a later stage. I think I want to stop here, Chair. Yeah, thank you very much. I think this has been an important program. For us from social development, we do continue to have interest. And maybe the last point related to the previous work around the social, the decent standard of living work. The elephant in the room in most instances, colleagues, it's good for us to have some interventions, but we also need to think about the issue of adequacy of what we may be providing. So if we have some measures that can say to us, yes, the intervention that we are giving is good, but if we compare to what evidence is giving us as to moving closer to a decent provision, what does this mean? And I think I was also grateful yesterday about the documentary, having the opportunity to have watched it in its full version of it. There are practical experiences, lived experiences, because the last speaker earlier mentioned about that the community is where the wealth of knowledge is. We may be here in Gauteng, but those lived experiences that are coming through the documentary, we hear about the lived experiences, one, and also from us as policymakers in government, where are the policy gaps, the practical policy gaps? So I think I would want to applaud the team that put together that piece of work, and also to challenge SPY and the other partners to say, how do we get this documentary out there? Because it's important. It shouldn't just be within us. You know, it's just an idea that I'm throwing to you.
Thank you. We have been trying to get SABC to pick up the phone. Norma.
For the time, I think I'm sitting here wearing so many hats, and my energy levels are seriously on zero. But a thought was sparked by Pedro, and I suppose it's a question to you to unpack. The first one was, when I first launched my policy brief 2 weeks ago, there's a comment that came up which was very interesting. I had never thought of it as a case for UBI. The professor from UJ said his support for UBI in South Africa is the fact that the poor in South Africa is still depending on supermarkets for their day-to-day needs versus the rest of the continent, where if you look at the poor in Malawi, the poor in Zimbabwe, they're not as poor as compared to a South African in Soweto who has to commute to Checkers or wherever to get their needs, but they own land. Their use for supermarkets and reliance on supermarkets is very minimal because they can grind their own meal, they can plant, they have ownership to land. So I think the question on land has come up, and also in support of a UBI, but from a very different perspective. And then I think my question to you, Pedro, would be if you can please unpack what you mean by communities, because I think you can pull two of us randomly in this room and you'll quickly find out we have a completely different interpretation and definition of what community is and means. So when you encourage SPY to go to communities and get that information, who are these communities? What do you mean by community?
Norma, you've now turned this into a question and answer session.
Thank you, Chair. Community is abahlali. Abahlali where people live. That is a community. So I'm from the community. I stay in the community, you know. So this thing that no academics must speak to communities as if we were, I don't know which academics are those, but I stay in Abahlali. I'm in a community. I was born in the community. I was raised in the community. I speak the language of the community. I stay in the community. I am the community. So the tags of being an academic and all, they come later. You have to remind me. Yeah. So a community is Abahlali. And Abahlali are not, I don't see them in most institutionalized knowledge.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid I've actually stopped looking at time, which is really bad as a facilitator. Twilight, do you want to add what you captured on that slide? Anyone else from SPY? Can we go online and just find out if there's anybody left online, whether they have anything to add? Okay, great. Is there anybody left online? Nobody's saying. Okay. Yep.
Hello. No, it's one I'm speaking. Hello.
I'm not hearing. I'm not understanding. Is Reinhard going to speak?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Please, Reina, go on. Thank you.
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes. I would like to make two suggestions from the discussion yesterday. One is the question to research, why does South Africa not have a sovereign wealth fund like Norway? Because this could be an important source for basic income. And South Africa has had in the past an extractive economy, and it probably will continue, especially with the green transition and all the minerals which exist in South Africa. So I would think that a sovereign wealth fund, which is funded through the extraction of minerals and other items, could be a useful source for basic income. But South Africa doesn't seem to have one. And my question would be, why is it and how can this be changed? The second point, which wasn't really discussed yesterday, but South Africa also has a lot of tourism and national parks. And in some countries, they have started to create a conservation basic income, basically using the receipts to give a basic income to surrounding communities so that they sort of have a strong interest in protecting natural resources and the parks. And that could be a sort of very practical type of, not a universal basic income, but a local basic income for certain communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So it's the Sovereign Wealth Fund, we actually do have that in the room. Says that it's already introduced onto the policy discussion. Definitely something to look at. It's something which has been on the books of the ruling party. That's by about about 10 years ago, SPY started a regional campaign called Islamic Basic Income Drive, which is based on the idea of a tax on extractives,
Which would go into a regional wealth fund and promote free movement of people across borders. But like many things in civil society, the funding died up. And so did the initiative around that. But I think that's really a useful idea. So we've been very privileged to be able to extract from people left in the room and virtually some ideas around thinking on social security going forward. I think the idea of how we link knowledge to lived realities has come forward again and again, but also in a way that holds us and our own thinking to account. I would like to thank all of you for being here, for giving us 2 days. I would like to thank Friedrich Ebert Stiftung for making this possible and also for supporting the position of our senior researcher, which enabled our just transition and social security research to come through and our publication on that. And in addition to that, Siraj for coming all the way up to Joburg. Thank you for leaving that really windy, wet place known as Cape Town with lots of imperialist ideas. Thank you. For new partners and old partners, thank you very much. And just supporting the vision that SPY has had and has grown into, almost like a young child into an adolescent, around how important it is to look at income distribution, redistribution, but also what Anthony was saying, it's not just about cash. I mean, that's always been the debate, the critique of basic income is you can't just give people money. And that's what the right-wingers want to do in the US is close down the state, give people money, they can buy their services privately, and that gets extracted and removed. But where is small business development? If we're talking about industrial development and SMMEs, can we get them in the room? And where does the debate happen? And maybe this room should not be in Wanderers. Maybe this room should be in Aberglaili. And that's where we need to go. And I look at you, Kwezi, because I'm sure that when we discuss next year's meetings, that should be a challenge that you throw down to us. Is where is the discussion happening and why? Because that frames the discussion and the realities. I would just like to say from my perspective that it's been an absolute pleasure at SPY this year getting the new team together. Noma, you don't need to study further. You see, knowledge is not great. You need to be in our community. Also, just to bring to the attention of those around the table, again, Aska Adalzade's EMA modeling plan and course that's open to sponsored engagement. And now it is up to me to say thank you very much. Give yourselves a pat on the back. Literally, I've started learning to do this. And please enjoy lunch, travel safely, and have a great and relaxing weekend. Thank you. And thank you to the technical team.